Welcome to God Answers Prayer. I'm Linda Tiano, your host today. And, I said this just recently about this chapter in Philippians, chapter 4. It's really having a profound effect in a lot of people's lives. And I think when we see things like this, we need to take notice and say, Lord, are you talking to me? Are you trying to tell me something? Help me to understand more of what this means. So Philippians chapter 4, verse 12 says, I know what it means to lack, and I know what it means to experience overwhelming abundance, for I'm trained in the secret of overcoming all things, whether in fullness or in hunger. James and Cassandra Delgado grew up in Santa Fe. Today, they're sharing their story of Yahweh's faithfulness and how He directed them in the way that He would have them go. We'll be right back after this. Well, we're back with James and Cassandra Delgado from Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's good to have you here with us.
Thank you. It's a blessing to be here.
Yeah. So I know you are members at the Light at Mission Viejo with Pastor Ron and Nina Sebesta.
Yes.
Wonderful people. And but let's find out a little bit more about you. I mean, you grew up in Santa Fe, both of you, right?
We did, with the river dividing us.
That's right. The Santa Fe, right on one side of the Santa Fe River. She was on one side, I was on the other.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you didn't know each other?
We did since we were very young. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We met in junior high. I was in 7th grade, he was in 8th grade. And he came to my house to meet a girl that he was interested in, which wasn't me. And that's how we met. And
on my bike, my pedal bike.
Oh.
That's how young we were. Yeah.
So what was it like growing up in Santa Fe for you, Cassandra?
I was the oldest in my family. Mm-hmm. I am the oldest in my family. So I took care of my siblings that are, the youngest is 16 years younger than me. And growing up in Santa Fe was wonderful. We had a lot of freedom back then. Mm-hmm. Things were different.
Yeah.
So I would take my siblings to the movies and to go swimming and go to the park, and they called me Mommy's sister, and all of that was wonderful. There's 4 of us and my mom and dad. But Santa Fe was wonderful.
So this was like 70s, 80s, 80s,
I was
90s?
born in 72.
Okay, yeah. So it was more of a small town.
It definitely had more of a small town feel. Like I said, there was just a lot of freedom, and we didn't lock our doors. When he would come to my house, he would say, why don't you guys ever lock your doors? That would never happen now.
No,
but
yeah.
It was sweet.
How about you, James?
Growing up in Santa Fe was awesome. Yeah, and of course we still live there, so we never left our hometown. I was born in 71, grew up with great parents, and I was the youngest. So I come from a split family. My dad was married. He had 4 kids. My mom was married. She had 2 kids, and then they got divorced, both of them. Then they got together in the late 60s, and I was born in 71. So I grew up with half brothers and half sisters.
Wow.
And it was great growing up in Santa Fe. We love our hometown, our native city. But going back to my brothers and sisters and their broken families, we could tell, you could see the effects of what that had on them, lifelong effects,
Right.
So there was struggle. There was always struggle, but my mom and dad stayed together. They did the best that they could. And just great people, I lost my dad in 2014, and my mom's still with us. She actually lives right next to us in the same house there. So
nice.
Yeah, but I loved growing up in Santa Fe.
Yeah. It's a wonderful place. I came in 1988, but it's home. It's where the Lord said go, and this is where you will stay. And And so it's home.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great home.
And it is a great home. So, you know, it's an interesting dynamic. You're the oldest in your family, and you're the youngest.
Yeah.
So bringing that into a marriage is probably has maybe a little different dynamics for you.
No doubt. And since we've been together since we were so young, you know, you don't think about it then, but you see, you start to, you know, develop your personality style, and we kind of grew up together. So we learned kind of on the job, so to speak. But yeah, I would think I was pretty spoiled, you know, being the youngest, you know. And then looking back at her life, she was like her siblings called her mommy sister. So she was taking a lot of the tasks on like a mommy sister would. And yeah, so we were different, definitely different
and
perspectives.
the firstborn, I mean, everything is all new for your parents, and it's a trial run with the firstborn. They learn more with each child, you know.
Right.
But so you were both raised Catholic, right?
We were, I think I was more of a practicing Catholic than he was. My family was very involved in the church. My parents were youth leaders. I was the bazaar queen at Guadalupe Church. We were very involved in like the fiestas, and which is interesting because it was all on the surface for me. Church was something we did every weekend. Wednesdays did all our what are they called? Sacraments. But a story of how I was living to set the example was my parents would drop me off at one door. I'd walk through the building, and James would be waiting for me out the other door. And we'd drive away, and then he'd bring me back before my parents were going to pick me up. So I wasn't really walking with Christ. I was going through the motions. I knew of God, but I didn't know God, and which is interesting because it was such a big part of my life, but I just didn't have that connection.
So all this came into the marriage.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So basically, once you were married, what did you do? Did you continue to go to church, or?
I did.
Or just
well,
on
first
the
of all,
holidays?
which is interesting, we did everything backwards and wrong. So we had kids, we had our first child, we bought a house, we lived together for 16 years, had another kid, and then we got married.
Wow.
So yes, we did everything backwards. But to answer your question, yes, I would take the kids, and they went to Catholic church, and they did all of their sacrament. Well, the oldest one did their sacraments, and he would come to church with us on Christmas and Easter. Maybe.
Yeah.
Again, but it still wasn't. It was all tradition.
Right.
It was like what I grew up knowing, going through the motions.
Yeah, and it's comfortable.
Right.
Yeah. So what happened that made you realize that there was something really missing?
Yeah. Well, I grew up being a Catholic also, but, you know, just going to church on Christmas and maybe Easter and things like that. So we were Catholics, but never really practicing or not too much into my faith. So that's how I grew up. But there was one time, and she has a better memory than I do, but it was about 2005. And these Jehovah's Witnesses came to our door. And we used to hide when they used to come. They'd knock on the door and they'd, shh, don't make any sound. Hide. Did they leave yet? You know, but they did come to our door, and one time we let them in, and, you know, it was a really nice older man, Ken Manning and Cecilia, and beautiful couple, you know. You want to share how that you remember that first encounter?
Well, it was interesting because we had just moved from one house to another, and at our previous house we had been caught by another Jehovah's Witness family, and they gave him a book. And at our new house, we didn't have any furniture, and he was laying on the floor reading this book when that door rang, and he opened the door for that gentleman, and he was like, what are you reading? And what were you reading?
It was a little book that says what the Bible really teaches, a little yellow book, you know. And again, I've never read the Bible to that point or anything like that. So that's what it was. And yeah, I believe that was Ken Manning. Yeah.
So they invited us over to their home to have tea and to read the Bible, and said, bring your own Bibles. But I think it's interesting, before we go there, I really need to give you the backstory of how we landed there. We wanted to get married. And we went to our priest and said, we want to get married. And the priest said, we're not going to marry you. And I said, why? We have 2 kids. He said, because he doesn't have his sacraments. And I said, so if I brought a man off the street that wasn't the father of my children, but he had his sacraments, you would marry me, you would marry us? And he said, yes. And that really started making me question. So I opened the Bible for the first time then to say, what does it say about marriage in the Bible? And I started researching that. And then another thing that happened was, when we moved, we didn't get the mailing envelopes where you put your tithe in. So I was just putting money in the basket. And the church called us and said, if you don't start tithing in your envelopes, we're going to disenroll you from our church. And I said, I put money in every Sunday. I don't know what you're talking about. And they said, well, we can't account for it because you're not using the envelopes. And I said, but tithing isn't between you and I. Tithing is between God and I. Yeah. And so then I opened the Bible the second time to read what the book said about tithing. So then I left the church, and then we were just kind of floundering. And this is when we get to this point.
Yeah. So once we met them, it started off a Bible study for about 2 to 2.5 years at their home. I think it was once or twice a week. So we would bring our little kids, Dominique and Joshua, and the 4 of us would sit there and we'd fellowship and read the Bible. And that I remember those years very, very well. And that transformation started to take place. Yeah, when you started reading those scriptures, it was amazing. Yeah. I loved it because my family was together. Yeah. We were reading the Word, and we essentially all came to the Lord at the same time, and that was the beginning. Yeah. Yeah.
That was the beginning. Our son started memorizing the Bible books in order, and
he was about 6 or 7 years old, and yeah.
But I would leave mad a lot of times. Because what they were teaching didn't line up with what my spirit was saying. And so we would argue about that and say, I'm not going back there. And then we'd go back the next week. And that went on for how many, like 2 years?
Yeah. And my perspective was, oh my gosh, we're sitting here as a family, we're reading the Bible together. And I was just so happy to be doing that. Yeah, but she wasn't feeling quite right.
Yeah.
About
I'm
it.
very grateful about that time, for sure. But I guess to answer the question, God was heavily pursuing us for a very long time.
That's right.
It sounds like it.
In many different ways. He would, in like 3 months, I had 4 different Bibles given to me by different people out of total weird situations. A friend had given me a book, the Left Behind series, and said, I bought this for us to read together. And she never read it, but I read it. There were a lot of things that God was positioning to get us where He needed us, so that we
get our attention.
So that we could hear.
Yeah.
And how we landed off at the light was, I had a Bible on my countertop at my office. I was a mortgage loan officer for 16 years, and one of the elders from the light was moving to Santa Fe to be an elder at the light. And he came to me to get a loan, and he saw my Bible on the countertop, and he said, "You're a Jesus lover?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Jesus seeker." Like
okay, let's pause right there for a minute. And do you feel like you're being pursued today? The Word tells us that nobody comes to Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, unless the Father draws them. The Delgados were being drawn mightily. And he says in Jeremiah, "For I have loved you with an everlasting love, and I have drawn you by my loving kindness." if you're feeling something like that today, will you call us? We've got prayer partners that would love to pray with you. The number's right there on the bottom of the screen. So give them a call and say yes. Say yes. That's the beginning. I believe, and I need you. I want you to come into my life and change me. We'll be right back after this. We're back, and you know, you were talking about, you were a loan officer, and a guy that was becoming an elder at the Light at Mission Viejo came into your office, saw the Bible on your desk. So tell us about how that went.
Yeah, so when he said, you're a Jesus lover too, and I said, well, I'm a Jesus seeker. And he pulled out an invite and said, I'd really like you to come check out our church. He's, I'm moving here specifically because of this church, and I think you would love it. So I came home and told James, hey, let's go try this out. And he's like, no, I'm going to watch football. So that Sunday I went, and when I walked in, it was still, they hadn't built the addition yet, so they were still meeting in the cafeteria. And I remember many people that I know well now, but watching them, I didn't know them then, and I just kept looking. And they were in worship, and I'm like, I want that. I don't know how they're having that moment with God, but I want that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get there, so I'm going to come back. So I started going and taking the kids. I was telling James last night, remembering that every time I'd go, I'd cry and be like, that message was for me. How did Pastor Ron know that? How did he know I was going through that or needed to hear that? Or, and we kept going, and we were in a Christmas play, and James came to the Christmas play.
Yeah.
And it was so good. It was at the rodeo grounds. God just like put it together so well that it was so good. People would leave and bring more family and come back, and leave and bring more family. And they came to every show that day. And
It was so cold
it was
on the
cold.
outside, but then it was just an amazing time. Yeah.
So he said, I guess I'll check out that church. And prior to him coming, somebody had mentioned to me at a women's meeting, how do you know how to stand on God's promises if you don't even know what God's promises are? So I think you should do a study about that. So I was sitting at the edge of my bed one day, and I was reading through scriptures and making a list of God's promises and praying about him. And Acts 13 came up about believing and your whole family will be saved. And I just really held on to that and kept saying, Lord, they say that your word is true and it never changes, and that this is your promise. So I'm going to hold on to that. And he did. He came to the church, and he was never the same. Things started moving pretty rapidly after that.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing is our daughter was a teenager, and she was going to St. Mike's, and she wanted to do her confirmation with all of her friends. So instead of going to church with us on Wednesdays, she would go to the church that she grew up in for confirmation, and we'd go to Wednesday night Bible study, the three of us, he and I and our son. And then we'd pick her up, and on the way home, we would just be talking about, it was John Bevere's teaching.
Listening to a John Bevere study,
Great.
Yeah. And when she did her confirmation, that was hard, because I'm like, why would you want to do that? Like, like we're growing so much here. But the Lord is like, that's her walk. You need to let her do that. And when she finished, she's like, you guys are so different and have been changed. Can I come back to your church?
Yeah, and that's when she started coming. And I remember when I first decided to go to the Light, those first few services, it was just like I was being taken over. You know, I knew where I was, where I needed to be right then and there. And I got to meet some amazing people. And those relationships are still going today, strong. Pastor Ron, Nina, the Sebestas, and just, it's been a beautiful journey. But to look back and think back of the transformation time, going back to when we first started reading the Bible, some specific scriptures that just blew me away was Philippians 4. Right before I can do all things, it was the ones right before that really touched me and caught me. about being content in any and every situation,
Right.
whether well-fed or hungry. And I just got the chills again, just relaying that scripture, because it brought peace. It brought peace in my life. It gave me perspective, changed my perspective and my priorities. Of course, I'm still a work in progress. We both are. But that was one of the scriptures that really, really got to me. And then along that line was Matthew 6:25 through 33, I believe, about do not worry. Do not worry. God has got it all taken care of. And those are some scriptures that really, really got to me and that were part of my early transformation. Yeah, I loved it.
So, I mean, literally, you began to experience the difference between religion and relationship.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the power of the Holy Spirit. I mean, when you said the worship, you would just cry. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the power of the Holy Spirit doing a work and cleansing, and just, pouring water from the top of your head to the soles of your feet. Yeah.
Now we know, but at the time you're like, what's going on? This is, it was surrender. It was the surrender process, and in our culture, the Hispanic culture, I don't know if that's a very manly word or manly thing to do, to surrender, but there's nothing better that you can do
Yeah.
as a man is to surrender to God for your family, so you can be a real leader within your family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to say, when you saw him begin to surrender to God, it became even more easy for you to surrender to his leadership, right?
Absolutely, and there's a whole story behind that I'm not going to get into, but briefly, in the time that we were together unmarried, things were so hard. They didn't have to be hard, but they were so hard because we were doing everything wrong and making excuses for why we were doing things wrong, which we didn't realize. But one of the things I used to say to him is, I need you to lead this family. And then he would say, what do you mean by that? And I'd be like, I don't know what I mean by that. I just need you to do that. And it was amazing when this transformation started to happen. It all just started to happen naturally. It wasn't something that had to be said, or it was amazing. And I'm very proud of him for just giving into the call, because a lot of people fight it and he didn't. Once God got a hold of him, that was it. And an interesting fact is, as a family, that Acts 13 promise, as a family, one day there was baptism at the church, and we all decided independently on the same day to get baptized.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
2010, I believe. Yeah.
Correct. November 2010, we all got baptized.
So where is the Lord leading you now? What is the mandate that he's given you?
Well, I think one of the things that is a burden in our heart is marriages and families in general, but especially our own families and our grandchildren, and really sowing into them and pointing them to God and keeping them covered in prayer. And I know James has a real burden he has a calling for saving lives.
Yeah. We want to save lives through sharing our testimony, and there's a lot, of course, that we haven't shared, a lot of things that we did in our past that we're not proud of, but we stuck it through.
And God uses it.
Yeah, and God uses it.
You're able to relate to people that you might not otherwise have been able to relate to.
Right. But literally, I want God to use me to save lives.
Praise God.
I mean, literally save lives, whether it's through our testimony or just me being obedient to hear his calling, to hear and act on those divine appointments. When he says, go speak to someone, go love on somebody, however that may be, then go and do it, because there's a need out there. So it's to save lives.
Well, I just we're already out of time.
Yeah.
It goes so fast when we talk about the Lord. It's so wonderful.
It is.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. And I want to thank all of you for being a part of our family here at KCH TV. You're important. We love you, and this is New Mexico's TV station. I mean, this is for the people to be able to share their stories. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your financial support, and keep praying. And if you are out there and you don't know where you stand, or maybe there's some situation in your life and you need prayer, there's a number on the bottom of the screen that you can call. And there are wonderful, beautiful people that will pray with you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you. May He lift up His countenance upon you and give you His everlasting peace. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you for joining us today on God Answers Prayer. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on our program, please contact us by visiting kchftv.org and click on Share Your Testimony. Our prayer partners are here to pray for your needs. Call us today at 505-345-4165. We appreciate your prayers and support. Join us again next time for more inspiring stories and testimonies. Remember, God is always listening, and He answers our prayers in His perfect timing.